Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, January 22nd. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you. Back to our 2025 position preview series. Today, we begin with part 1 of 3 as we focus on the outfield. And that means pitcher week is next week, coming up very quickly. A lot of ground to cover today. We're going to probably get through the first 25 or 30 outfielders, most of the guys drafted inside the top 100 overall based on NFBC ADP. So that's about where the cutoff will be for this episode. We'll get to the next group on Thursday. We'll get to the final group on Friday. So a lot of outfield talk coming up here in the next few days. And in our Discord, where you can also be part of the Hive Mind rankings. The link to join those is in the show description, as is the link to join the Discord. We got a separate channel for that. It's going to be 50 outfielders for the Hive rankings, so you can wait for a couple episodes to come out and then do it, or you can just go at it right away. Your call. The decision is entirely yours. You know, how's it going for you on this Wednesday?
Good. We kicked over a bit of a hornet's nest with the Dodgers conversation, and I just wanted to clarify a couple things because I've been talking to people nonstop since our episode dropped. And one, we didn't have to sort of constructed as a conversation about the Dodgers. You can think that the system is broken because the Pirates aren't spending, for example, more than the Dodgers are spending. So, but you could still think that the system is broken. So I wanted to put that out there. I also wanted to say that parity may not be have such a final sort of yes or no answer to it. I think I suggested as much when I said that there's such a thing as too much parity for me. If I didn't know who was good at all, I would have a hard time following a sports league, especially as a sort of fair weather fan. And so when we look at the parity and say we think that there's parity, I can see how other people might suggest that, smaller market teams have smaller windows. Regular season wins still have some correlation with payroll, if not the tightest. That could be a basis of an argument. But I would still, put the ball back in the other side of the court in terms of these discussions I've been having and say, I'd like to get an argument for what is broken, and not one that is just like, oh, the payrolls, because that's sort of just a fact of the sort of inputs. I'm talking about the outputs. Like what was your evidence that baseball is broken from an output standpoint? Because baseball, is over $12 million. It's basically tied with the NBA as the second most popular sport. It's got the most attendance and views it's ever gotten. And we don't have repeat champions. We've had 4 different champions in the last 4 years. Exactly. So in those terms, what is broken? That's my question. Because this is something I'm teaching my kids is like whenever you're having an argument that you were talking about overrated, like the question of overrated the other day, because they were talking about like characters in Smash Brothers, and they were yelling, oh, that guy's totally overrated. And it's like, hey guys, if you're going to have a conversation like this, you have to define your terms, what is the rating system? What do you mean? Do you have any sort of rating system? Who's rating it? Who's making it overrated? What's underrated? In this discussion, I think defining the terms, what is broken, is the question that I have. If we can define what is broken, then we can continue the conversation about how to fix it. I don't look at other sports with caps and say that they have it necessarily better. I look at football, and there are teams that have never won or that are terrible. They just suck every year, and they're dynasties, and they have a cap. So and then all things, I do have a bias. All things equal, I would rather that the players union was strong and had guaranteed contracts. I think that if there is a minute way that football is better in some way, I mean, I do know in terms of revenue they're better off. That they have the weakest player union and the weakest contract situation. So.
Yeah, and that matters in a huge, huge way. I don't think the intent was ever to just like point out our side and just run away. It's never really how this works. It's always an ongoing conversation, which is why Discord's such a great place to drop in. Big deferrals, I think, was a big thing that came up in Discord that we didn't talk about on the show. But I do find that to be particularly frustrating, not having to pay present dollars, being able to just kick that so far down the road, how that circumvents the competitive balance tax that we have in baseball, how that actually impacts his taxed revenue in the places where these players live. That has like a whole.
Yeah, there are. Yeah,
I'm not going to kick that today. Like that wasn't.
It could be avoiding California taxes with a lot of that, and
Right.
that's a relevant thing. And then also, like I said, that maybe there could be some stuff with sharing TV money in a better way. I brought that up. So I like, we're not saying that there's nothing that we can change about the current system. It's more just
No.
Like I think one thing that we're pushing back against is the idea that a cap would be better for baseball. So
Yeah,
if you're
100%.
going to make the argument that a cap is going to be better, I'd like to hear it, because I don't really see it. And then, one thing I wanted to bring up really quickly about deferrals is just that the reason they exist is because both sides think that they're beneficial. Now, we can from the outside say that, this doesn't look beneficial to the player because present value is higher than future value, but they have tax lawyers that are on this. They have, the players have people on their side that are, doing the math, and the team has people on their side. So there's a battle over this. And if it wasn't good for the players, I would think that like Boris Company and those guys would have figured this out by now. So there are some benefits for them this way or that, and that's why it still exists.
Hopefully we didn't just kick 3 more Hornets nests on the way to the outfield preview. That was not the intent yesterday. It was not the intent today. But sometimes you kick them on accident, and that's the way life goes sometimes. It's not pleasant when that happens. Let's get to the outfield preview. We'll start at the top.
Studs.
I split the top tier. This is all tier 1. The first group you see on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, they're the first rounders, but I would say the second rounders are also in tier 1, because you can pretty easily argue some of those guys up into this group. And you could see maybe a couple of guys from this group falling just a little bit, mostly because of health-related concerns, I think. But we begin at the very top. Aaron Judge probably deserves a first overall argument. I don't think we have to go into great detail, but the main reason for it is the power is phenomenal, right? And in a game where stolen bases are easier to find in many corners of the pool, one of the areas where you can really stand out from a power perspective. And Judge does that. 3 seasons in a row with just absurd contact quality, a barrel rate above 25% each of the last 3 seasons. Every time I look at that, I'm like, is that real? Did that actually happen? No, that actually did happen. I think the counter arguments to Judge that I see and hear the most are injury related. I think he has a greater combination of bizarre kind of freak accident type injuries. I mean, the toe injury at Dodger Stadium that he suffered running into the base of the outfield wall. Yeah, he mentioned having to maintain that for the rest of his career, but I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that players suffer injuries and then have to rehab or maintain things from them forever, and they don't always tell us what they are. We don't always realize it. Like, that's part of being a professional athlete, maintenance. So
yeah, and in terms of results on the field, you got 633, 696, 458, and 704 in terms of plate appearances for Judge. I mean, that's actually pretty healthy. That's a pretty good 4-year stretch. I mean, you would project that just based on those numbers alone to be mid 600s this year.
Right. So I don't have major playing time concerns. I mean, the biggest knock might be that he's 33, so we could see decline start to creep in, but it really hasn't been there to this point. I don't really see evidence of Aaron Judge losing skills, and he's on the very short list of players that you almost expect to hit 50 home runs if the playing time holds up from a health perspective all year.
Yeah, I could see the stolen bases going back to sort of 3 to 4 a year. Yeah. And I could see at some point the strikeout rate starting to change. And what you can see in the projection systems is their different aging curves for strikeout rate. So Oopsie has a 25% strikeout rate, 25.3, and Steamer has a 26. So that's already a little bit of a difference in terms of what kind of aging curve they're using.
Nevertheless, Judge, a top 3 player for me, probably a top 3 player for a few other folks, doesn't fall much further than like pick 4, pick 5 in most rooms, and for good reason. I think it really opens up as far as what do you like in your first round pick if you're going to go to the outfield with the rest of this group, though, between Soto, Tucker, and maybe even Corbin Carroll, but Soto and Tucker in particular, I think are your pretty common like next 2 outfielders off the board. I wonder with Soto, moving into Citi Field, leaving Yankee Stadium as a home park, should we be concerned? Because like the expected homer number shows no difference from the year he spent at Yankee Stadium. Like if he had played last year in Citi Field by X homers, at least he would have expected to hit the same number. Kind of a surprise.
It was his career highest in pull rate, so maybe he pulled more of his homers last year.
Right, but I think when we talk about things hitters can control and how good they are at making adjustments, you'd put Soto in whatever your top tier is for being able to adapt, change, and modify his approach. I think he's got that sort of elite ability. He's had that along with phenomenal strike zone judgment from day one in the big leagues. I think the biggest change is that he had the lowest ground ball rate since 2019. That helped push the home run total up over 40 for the first time, in addition to pulling it and using the park. But other than the fact that he's just not going to do much with steals, I mean, this is a guy that stole 7 bases in the biggest walk year since Ohtani.
Yeah, that's true.
He's not going to run more than that, I wouldn't think, even though he's only 26, and it's just not his game, right? So he's just a 4-category stud. It's not that different than Judge, albeit maybe with a little more variance on the batting average potentially.
For Soto.
Yeah, for Soto. Like, that's the weird part,
right?
That's
weird because his strikeout rate's so much lower than Judge's.
Yeah, that's the part that you wouldn't expect, but we've seen the variance kind of in both directions. I mean, the shortened season, he hit 351. It's only 47 games, but even the 313 that he hit in 2021 with the Nats, that's in there, just as there was a 242 in there in 2022. Like some odd things.
And it kind of goes up. It goes up and down a little bit with his pull rate. You know, the year that he hit 313, he pulled 31% of the time. And the year that he hit 242, he jumped up to 38, which he's sort of figured out how to mesh those two approaches, I think. Where now he's pulling more than ever, but he still can go oppo, you know, like that's still part of his ability. And I think one thing that he does is he loves the pitch up. And he will basically spend the first half of the season only swinging at pitches up. And then if pitchers are able to fill him up in the zone down, every once in a while, he'll just go down there and do something with it and force them to kind of rethink going back up, you know? So it's a cat and mouse for him, but he's so good at it. And he's so good at knowing where he wants to swing. His chase rate is so elite, and his sort of command of not only the zone, but where he wants it, you know, is so strong that I think he's basically meshing a kind of a 2-strike fight it off approach with I'm just waiting for you to make a mistake up that I'm going to take out of here. And those two together are going to produce a OBP over 400, and I think at least 33 homers. One thing that I worry about is playing time. We've seen his sprint speed really drop for Soto. And he's not athletic like he used to be. In the outfield, at the very beginning, he did have one of his better defensive numbers last year. But, those years in San Diego still exist where he was pretty wooden out there in the outfield. And so I wonder if, being out on the field as much as he has been and playing, averaging close to 160 games a year for the last 3 years, that might be the part that changes. That there's some maintenance, some body maintenance that he's going to do now that he's got the full deal that he wanted. And so we may see more like, 620 plate appearances, which isn't a ton of a difference, but it will reduce some of his runs, RBI, and his potential, his top-end power potential. I don't know. I mean, I do know that Colton and the Wolfman often talk about how they don't want to get a guy in his big contract season. And we have some reasons that we've seen. You mentioned the steals, but I also think playing time, one thing that you'll see from players in their walk years is a playing time boost. And so it makes sense that they might step back off of that playing time once they're guaranteed for however many years.
On the flip side, still 26, and the Mets are paying him $51 million a year, so they're probably going to play him heavy these next couple of years and maybe slowly taper into something like you're describing with that added maintenance sort of built in. What are you doing if you're looking at Tucker versus Soto, though, in the middle of round one? Because I think this is kind of a question of, do you want that potential for the better power floor, which I think Soto reasonably has, although Tucker, man, he was on a great pace last year. Like, the fracture in his leg cost him about half the season, and hit a career high OBP, career high slug. It was a 46 home run pace. So the power was ticking up a little bit. And I think Tucker's stolen bases, even with low sprint speed, are more reliable than the contributions you get from Soto in that category. So where do you go if you're looking at those two in the middle of the round?
I'm going to go with Soto. I've gotten a share of Tucker, but Soto wasn't available to me. So I think generally ADP has Soto slightly ahead of Tucker. And I think it's just such an excellent floor. And then here's the where I think there's some question with Tucker is the new park. So if you look last year, we have this up on YouTube, is the difference between home runs and expected home runs. And Anthony Santander had 44 actual homers and 36.6 expected homers. It's the biggest difference, 7.4. Somehow Enrique Hernandez ended up second, 14 homers, 7 expected homers. Kind of amazing. Third is Kyle Tucker with 23 homers and 16.7 actual homers. The other way around. 23 actual homers, 16.7 expected homers. So that's a large difference. And if you look at the difference in park factors between the two stadiums, he's going from basically a 105, kind of ninth, friendliest park for left-handers in Houston, to like a 95 park factor for lefties, which is more like the 23rd friendliest for lefties. I tried to look at his spray chart where you take his hits from the last 2 years, and then overlay them on Wrigley. And I think there's two things going on here. Of course, Wrigley is smaller. So you see all those homers for Kyle Tucker that are along the wall in Houston. He's got a lot of room. If you just did this, you'd say, wow, look at all those outs and doubles that are going to turn into homers in Wrigley. The problem is Wrigley is cold and the wind blows in. So those balls won't even go as far. So I think that the competing bits there, that the park is smaller but colder and the wind is going to affect him, I think it'll kind of go out in the wash a little bit. I mean, if you look at the expected homers by park, it's not that different. So it said basically that over his career, Kyle Tucker would have lost 3 homers if he had his career at Wrigley. So I tend to think this is going to be fine. I like Tucker. I chose Tucker over Tatis because I think that Tucker's health issues seem like kind of localized within 1 year. I know it wasn't great, but we only had like 1 year where Tucker had a weird injury that took forever, and there were some whispers that maybe Houston misdiagnosed it and kind of, mistreated him a little bit, in terms of the treatment plan and all that stuff. So that's different than Tatis, who I have to admit, as much as I like, seems to have something every year.
Yeah, the concern with Tatis is multifaceted. I mean, it was a femoral stress reaction in his quad last year. He's had wrist stuff, shoulder stuff, major shoulder concerns. The
2 surgeries before 2023, I think.
Yeah. If you look, I mean, he hasn't returned to the pre-PED suspension barrel rates, but he's strong enough power that you look at him and say, okay, it's 30 homers pretty easily with health. But the with health there is a bigger lift than it is with Tucker. I would agree with that because with Tatis, it's multiple years and different body parts. He also went 11 for 14 as a base stealer last year. It's a little light. It's a little lighter than what I would have expected. Projections love him. It's just a question of how much you believe.
280, 39 homers, and 22 stolen bases. I think most of the projection systems say I made a mistake with the Tucker decision.
Yeah, but
they all have him for 680 plate appearances.
Right. Are you buying 600? I mean, 679 plate appearances would be a career high. He did get to 635 in 2023, first year back. So it's not that far in the rearview mirror. But I think for any player who's been in the big leagues for a few seasons, buying a career high in plate appearances when the reason for absence includes multiple injuries, it's a risky move, especially in round 1. You don't have to do it.
Round 1, yeah.
So maybe there's a few rooms where he slides back a few picks and you're like, all right, I'm looking at Tatis at pick 15, pick 16. Great. That's an outlier sort of scenario. But I understand the cases against him, even though the payoff could be top 3, top 4 sort of hitter. He has those kind of skills. It's just been kind of funky from an injury perspective. Another thing on Tatis that I thought was interesting, he has maintained a lower K rate each of the last 2 seasons compared to what we saw back in 2021. So,
that's
low
why
20s.
There's that potential of a 280 batting average, possibly.
Yeah, the low 20s K percentage, I think, is what's kind of driving the average and overall projections up a little bit from what we've seen, in addition to those playing time boosts. So Corbin Carroll is a frequently discussed player on this show for obvious reasons. He's fun to watch, has been a first rounder before, had a weird season last year, and managed to bounce back in the second half. Carroll was the 5th most valuable hitter from the Fangraphs player rater in the second half last year. Ohtani, Judge, Witt, and Vlad were the 4 ahead of him. 17 homers, 17 steals in the second half, which should, the power especially, should ease some of the concerns we've had about the health of Corbin Carroll's shoulder. Average was still kind of light in the second half at 258 while he was doing that, but he runs well, hits the ball over the place, doesn't strike out a ton. I think generally that's a lighter end sort of average for a guy with Carroll's skills. I guess if I'm looking for something beyond longer term questions about his shoulder, which maybe are reduced after the second half, left-handed pitchers have been pretty good against Carroll. He's got a 242, 309, 394 career line against them. It's a 93 WRC plus, probably not bad enough for a player that young with the contract he signed to lose playing time, but maybe enough to cost them spots in the batting order, depending on who they can mix and match in the order on any given day against lefties.
And his defense is not a problem, but it's not center field defense, I don't think, which is a little surprising to me given his tools. And so if he's not your center fielder, a 93 WRC plus becomes less playable, if it sticks that way, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a little bit of smoke there. I'm just pleased that the underlying numbers also for Carroll suggest that in the second half he was lifting the ball more and hitting the ball hard in the air more. The power is the real question mark I have around him. But a max EV of 113.8 in 2023 and last year 111.5, that's enough of a max EV, I think, to have good comps, basically. I'm looking here. I have second half numbers, but if you're looking in the 111 to high 111 to 112 area, you can find Jackson Chourio, Elliot Ramos, Lars Nootbaar, Nick Castellanos, Trevor Larnach. Julio Rodríguez only had a 112.6, and we don't doubt his power at all. So James Wood had a 111.4. Corbin Carroll, not quite there with a 111.5. I mean, he's there with Wood, but the second half was 111.1. I think he probably has enough power to be a 25 homer hitter. I think I believe the projection's there. It is interesting to see Steamer more homers than Oopsie. So something in the bat speed, which you can see in the max EV, is dragging down the sort of power upside for Carroll. But let's say he just hits 20 homers, steals 40 bases, and has a batting average regression back to 260, 270. That is a top 10 player, I think.
Do you not just see another version of Trey Turner here? Is it just Trey Turner from the left side playing in the outfield instead of playing on the dirt? That's what I see.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And there were a lot of years where Trey was returning top 10 overall value. So I think if you're not worried about the shoulder, absolutely fine to build around Corbin Carroll. I think you can get a lot more in terms of speed when everything's clicking for him too. We saw proof of that with the 54 for 59 he had in 2023, and even the 35 for 43 last year with a 40-point drop in OBP. That's still a pretty good outcome for a down year like Corbin Carroll just had. So I think he's still pretty safe, all things considered, in this range. Julio gets in here just at the back of round one. Here's the thing I'm worried about with Julio. What's changed from last year with his supporting cast? I feel like there's a limitation around him that is unique for this entire group. Would you safely say the Mariners supporting cast is worse than the Yankees, the Mets, the Cubs, the Diamondbacks, and the Padres supporting cast?
Yeah. I mean, it's not all their fault. Like there's a park factor.
Yes, right.
Too.
But as far as how it impacts Julio, run and RBI production could lag. And I know we talked to Trevor May about this a few times. You wonder if there's an extra pressure a player like Julio is going to feel trying to swing his way out of a team slump, right? You mentioned last summer when it seemed like he was beginning to put the pieces together is right when he hit the IL briefly. So that stretch that might have helped correct his season got nicked by the injury. Where do we go from here with Julio? Do we still have top 5 ceiling? Do you still see all the things in that profile that made everyone chase him at the top of the round, early in the round a year ago? I mean, I think the plate skills are a little odd for a first rounder. A career 6.6% walk rate's a tad low for a guy that's still striking out 25% of the time. Mm-hmm. But I could also convince myself that he's so young, he just turned 24 in December, that strikeout rate's not necessarily the strikeout rate we're going to get as he kind of moves into his peak.
Yeah, that's interesting. By aging curves, you can improve your strikeout rate until 26 and 27. So he still has the possibility there. And that's, for Steamer, suggests that he's going to have the best strikeout rate of his career. Actually, all the projections.
They all do, yeah.
Yeah. And I do wonder about maybe the early 30s for him because the chase rate is not great, for Julio. But he's in his athletic prime. He's stolen, 24, 25 bags every season. And he has way better batted ball quality than Corbin Carroll. So if anybody we've talked about right now up to this point has a 30-30 season in him, it's him. I mean, he has more health than Tatis, probably more health, and he's faster than Tucker, and he has batted ball qualities that are at least on par with current Tatis, not pre-suspension Tatis. So I don't know. I think he, would you agree with me that if somebody was going to go 30-30 so far, it'd be Julio?
Yeah, out of this group of outfielders, yeah, because I think Tucker probably does fall short by speed, only by a little. Soto won't do it. Judge won't run that much. Carroll probably comes up short on power. Yeah, I think that's sound. And then Tatis, it's the playing time. So it's sort of like a less risky version of the Tatis projection for me, because the health track record's not nearly as scary. There really isn't. There's just a minor injury that was last year from Julio.
And even then, he still put up 613 plate appearances. So
I think the thing that I like about being in this sort of position, and Mookie Betts, we covered him in the shortstop preview. He's still outfield eligible, of course, even though it's more shortstop duty coming for him in 2025, is that you can pair someone like Julio with a more established player, someone who's done it for a few years, right? So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, because you have two picks clustered together, and you can feel like you've got two easy first round sort of talents. That's part of the appeal for me of being later in the draft order. We'll talk about where we really want to be. Probably in February, we'll do a Kentucky Derby style discussion about which draft positions are the best and why we like them. But the flip from where we are right now to the guys that are in round 2 is a lot of fun. So if you look at the second rounders, Jackson Chourio, Yordan Alvarez, Jarren Duran.
Still studs.
Jazz Chisholm Jr., we talked about him on the third base preview. Jackson Merrill goes in this range. And then you got Ronald Acuña Jr. coming off of his second ACL tear in this group as well. But we'll start with Chourio. I mean, he went through what you would describe as, I think, a pretty typical adjustment phase of any young player, especially one as young as him. Seeing big league pitching for the first time. We saw improvements in the eye. We saw the power rise over the course of the season. There really wasn't a lot of swing and miss for a guy that didn't spend much time above AA. Like, there's just a ton of things to like about the progression. The raw talent it's obvious, right? To see him right there at the end of round 1, beginning of round 2, though, it's an even more aggressive decision than taking Julio in that spot, in my opinion, at least. So I'm curious if you think the market is pushing Jackson Chourio too fast, or if this is just one last stop on his way to the early part of round 1.
The talent is undeniable, but There are some questions, I think, for Chourio in terms of true talent power that Alvarez has answered. Yordan Alvarez is one of the two best pure hitters in the game, and maybe there's some questions about his knees and his health and how many plate appearances he'll give, but he seems to be in the prime of his career and in terms of playing time there. So if I was doing a Julio connection, I think a Julio Chourio connection would feel great in a 10-teamer and feel pretty good in a 12-teamer and feel a little bit riskier in a 15-teamer, I feel like. I don't know. Is that just my like sort of anti-risk warning going off too early? But I don't know. You could come out of that with two guys that hit for an okay batting average and have like 24 homers and 20 steals, and that's fine, and that'll still be pretty high floor, and that's why you're buying them in the beginning. But that's not two superstars that's not the projections, So yeah. I just wanted to throw that out there. Also, for me, what's interesting about Chourio is that there's this gap between Chourio and Merrill. And in fact, I think I picked Merrill over Chourio in one league. And this is why I don't see a difference here. They're the same guy. It's a Spider-Man meme. I mean, look at this. They're exactly. There's no difference between these things. Jackson Chourio's 20, I guess. Jackson Merrill's 21. That's not a big difference. In the second half, they both had 12 homers. Chourio had 12 stolen bases. Maybe you'd like that better. But in terms of sprint speed, I don't think they're that far apart. So it's just a willingness to steal, which Jackson Merrill could display more of in his second year. They both don't walk a lot, but they both make a lot of contact. Chourio's ISO is 242. Merrill's is 283. Both run high BABIPs. Their slash lines: Chourio 310, 363, 552. Jackson Merrill 314, 349, 596. It's really nice. Barrel rates go to Merrill. Max EV slightly to Chourio. Hard hit 46.8 for Chourio, 44.4 for Merrill. Chase rate goes to Chourio by a couple of percentage points. Swing strike rate goes to Chourio. So maybe you can like Chourio off of these things. Maybe I made a mistake in taking Merrill over him, but I don't think there should be a gap. I think they should go right next to each other. And I guess my argument is they should go right next to each other at the top of this tier, behind Yordan Alvarez.
Yeah, and for those who are not watching on YouTube, you might remember from The Office when Pam brought a couple pictures to Michael and said, corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture, and then it cuts to her sitting there. They're the same picture. That's how similar the numbers really were in the second half. I'm with you in that. I think what prepping for this episode led me to was wondering why people prefer Jarren Duran and Jazz Chisholm Jr. to Jackson Merrill.
That's right. I think that's probably the answer.
It's just slightly rearranging that group, and that's not shade at Jarren Duran. That's not shade at Jazz Chisholm Jr. We've talked a lot about those two guys, and I think the questions between the Jacksons and then Yordan Alvarez, that's what type of profile are you more comfortable having locked in? And then are you taking Julio or Chourio with Alvarez? Are you trying to pair some combination of those guys together, right? Like that's a possibility as well.
I do want to throw an idea out there real quick. I've sort of normally shied away from two outfielder beginning because I feel like there's so many outfielders at the end game, but almost in the first two rounds, you should almost take the position off of the names. I feel like, because you're buying bats. You're just buying the best bats in the game. You know what I mean? And so if you come out with two outfielders, that's fine. You might have just come out with two guys that might go 30-30 this year, with good batting averages. Who cares what position they play? And that allows you to then, take a break off of outfield for a while. You can still have a stars and scrubs outfield. You can still take advantage of late outfielders just because you have two, got too early. And the nice thing is, the one thing that is a little bit harder to do, it's a little bit crazier to kind of take two shortstops in the first two rounds, because you're locking yourself in more ways than taking two outfielders. You have 5 outfield slots in most leagues.
Yeah, I don't worry as much about the outfield combo as other people do. So I've done that before and didn't feel like it messed up my build or steered me in a direction where I was chasing something. I think you have to be a little more sensitive to where the drop-offs are at other positions if you do that. Because if you have some longer waits, especially if you're drafting from an end position, which you probably are more likely to be doing if you take a combination of guys we're just talking about right here, longer break between picks. Okay, where are the huge cliffs? That way you don't get bumped down a tier or possibly two at multiple positions as a result of having to kind of stretch it out a little bit more. But I don't think anything's tailing off so fast where two outfielders causes a problem for you quite like that. Now, the Jarren Duran, Jazz Chisholm, like that, we're not skipping these guys. I think with Jarren Duran, he's finally healthy. He had that foot injury in 2023. He was able to play a ton, 20 homer, 30 steal season with the defensive strides we've talked about. And now we've got about 1,000 plate appearances from the last two seasons where he's been more than 20% better than league average. He's a very good fantasy player and real life player at this point in his career. I'm wondering, though, if because of age, and maybe this would be true of Jazz as well to some extent, if it's easy to talk yourself into the next level from someone like Merrill being higher, and that's why it's easy to just kind of shift him around in the order, right? That's probably what my brain is doing to some extent. But Merrill was showing more pop in the second half in a way that I had not previously noticed. So I think it's really important to look at that. I think it was the Baseball HQ forecaster box that also did a good job illustrating that. So shout out to Brent Hershey, Ray Murphy, and the great team over at Baseball HQ for the great work they do on that book each and every year.
I would just point to the age as, being relevant maybe to the stolen base projection. Everyone projects him for 30 stolen bases, but he's 28, and I just remember when Jeff Zimmerman did an aging curve for stolen bases, it was a cliff. It was just down it goes, So I could see Jarren Duran having a good season this year as a 28-year-old and striking out more than he did last year and having a 260 batting average and going 20-22, which is fine. It's still a pretty high floor, but it's not necessarily what you're looking for when you're buying a second-round outfielder.
Right. And the reason I still prefer Jazz, if you're looking at those two against each other, maybe Merrill's gone. I think the speed, once we saw Jazz get to New York, the stolen bases took off to another level, and the quality of contact has been there for longer, right? Jarren Duran sort of got to that level, got close to the double-digit barrel rate. We've seen it 3 times from Jazz Chisholm, 2 over air quotes, full seasons. I'm not counting 2020 because he only played 21 games that year, but even the full season in which he did it, 16.6 and 12.2%. I just think we see that a little more year over year from Jazz. So that's the other part of the profile that leads me towards Jazz over Jarren Duran. But I don't think Jarren Duran's way out of place as a second rounder. I just think I like the other guys in this group a little bit more. What are you doing with Ronald Acuña?
I have no idea, dude. It's a second ACL surgery. I mean, we already saw his sprint speed totally drop off. I mean, what are you doing with it? These projections were 40 stolen bases. I'm saying nope.
I think it'd be foolish to assume that. I mean, we have one data point coming off of a torn ACL before, and I think you have to look. The first time he came off ACL surgery, he hit 15 homers and stole 29 bases over 533 plate appearances in 2022. That's a good season coming off a major injury like that. If he did that again, that's a good outcome.
2 years older, and it's another tear. It's like I can't imagine you would get better than 2022.
I can't imagine you go through all this rehab again, and the conversation you have internally is, well, let's just keep running the way we have. Like maybe you just say, this is how I play, but I think you have to err on the side of caution in terms of maybe the Braves saying, let's not play him every single day coming off of a second ACL tear. And so he's torn the ACL in each knee and tear it in the same knee twice, just for clarity for those who don't know.
But let's not steal even 30 bags,
Right. The only other skills thing that was kind of wild with Acuña is that in the monster 2023 season, he brought that K percentage way down, and that snapped right back to kind of the pre-2023 levels as well. The power wasn't there before he got hurt last year. Last year was a strange year before Acuña got hurt, which I think adds another wrinkle to figuring out what to do. Where you're choosing him is
the
often
top end bat
of round
speed
2.
is still there, though.
Yeah, it's like maybe that was just we've talked about the Braves having a different approach as a team, and teams maybe adjusting to that in 2024. So making some changes will be something that everybody in that lineup has to do over the course of the offseason. The bat speed's still intact. The raw is still there.
Yeah.
But if he's not going to run the same way, if we're not expecting to run quite the same way, it puts more pressure on the power being there the entire time for
right
return
away,
value.
After surgery, yeah.
And that's a big ask.
Yeah.
It's very easy, though, if you're sitting there, you start your team with Ohtani or Wyatt or Judge, and Acuña is sitting there at like pick 28, 29, or 30. Like, well, let's just go straight to the moon if this works out. I just
lean into the risk, yeah.
But even, okay, so what would your most optimistic projection? Acuña feels great, gets back pretty early in April or maybe early May, but it sounds like sometime in April is reasonable.
I think what I just said kind of for Duran.
Okay.
Like 260, 2020, maybe 2025.
So are you taking Jarren Duran or Ronald Acuña Jr. late in round 2? Or are you just going somewhere else entirely?
Duran.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. So a safer version of what you expect Acuña to do this year. And maybe the big rebound. I don't think the
projections are capturing this correctly because they don't know it's a second ACL surgery.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there's really a way to put that into the inputs.
Yeah.
Not a lot of guys have 2 ACL tears. Like that's also kind of a strange sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, I thought Royce Lewis, but also like Royce Lewis is a totally different kind of player. Like just doesn't have the same core foundation. Wasn't up in the big leagues long enough to do the things Acuña's done. So I don't want to like throw that out there and be like, oh, he's Royce Lewis now. That's not it. He's Acuña with 2 torn ACLs, and I don't know what that actually looks like. So I understand why people do it. I don't know if I'm going to have any Acuña this year. It feels weird to pass on him, to be completely clear. It's just like something in your brain's like, you should take him. Like, no, you shouldn't. Proof, I think, is the first time he came off an ACL tear. It just wasn't quite the same right away. I think it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Lindsey Vonn tore her ACL twice.
Oh, so now we're going to skiing comps.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a good indicator for us to make our way into the next tier. Hazel's ready for us to move on to the next tier as well. The next group of outfielders go between pick 30 and pick 50. So start of round 3.
These are still studs, dude.
Yeah, it's a nice group. It's Michael Harris, Oneil Cruz, Wyatt Langford, and James Wood. You could talk yourself into probably anybody in this group moving up a tier if you really want to.
One of these on all of my teams, I could almost just take one of each on a different team,
Just keep going one from each group.
Yeah.
3 outfielders to start out of 5.
I don't know. This is super exciting. Maybe it's an argument to stay away from Duran and Acuña and the back end of tier 2.
Maybe. Because I mean, I think of the group, the weird thing is the guy that I'm least sure about from what is his ceiling relative to the others' perspective is Michael Harris. We've seen more Michael Harris in the big leagues. He continues to have a high chase rate, but he doesn't strike out a ton. He was 10 for 16 as a base stealer last year, although it was a hamstring injury that he spent time on the IL with. Phenomenal defender that keeps him on the field, maxes out his playing time.
23.
He's still young,
yeah.
But so here's what's happening. I don't think Michael Harris is Dylan Carlson, but I'm mentioning Dylan Carlson here for a moment because I noticed something the other day. I was looking at Dylan Carlson's profile, and Dylan Carlson showed up in the big leagues in 2020, and that was basically like one of the best versions we saw of him was when he showed up. Like 2021 was his first full season. That was the best version. 2022, a little worse. 2023, a little worse. 2024, a little worse. And it shouldn't have declined quite like that. And I was really thinking about this pattern when I looked at Harris's page because Harris came up, it was phenomenal in 2022, 37% better than league average. Comes back in 2023, 15% better than league average. Comes back in 2024, 99 WRC plus, just a shade below. It's like, what's happening? Why isn't he actually getting better with the core skills that he has? I like him a lot as a player. I just started looking at the couple things like the chase, the lack of walks. Like
he's just super aggressive. So sometimes he'll make bad contact, right? Is that what it is? I mean, because he's not Dylan Carlson in terms of he has excellent bat speed.
Yeah, he hits the ball hard. Like he's a different player. Yeah. It's the showing up and then just getting a little worse thing that I'm like,
maybe he's like,
why?
Maybe it's easier to have a book on Harris than some other players because you're like, he's just going to get up there and swing. That's what he's up there to swing. I've seen this in Little League a lot. Like, pitchers immediately put you into a box of like, you're up there to swing or you're up there to take. It's in Little League. It's really obvious kind of between the two, like there'll be guys that just don't swing until there's 2 strikes, because they don't really want to swing, and I think Harris
swing. Coach gets the swing, please.
Oh my God. Yeah. The coach is always yelling swing at those guys. I mean, my kid's one of them. It's fine. He wants to be a pitcher. And so, Harris is up there to swing. And, you could probably coax some poor contact out of him. So you see that 361 BABIP. You could also say maybe that's luck, but, since he hits the ball hard, 361 BABIP, 334 BABIP, 300 BABIP for Harris in those consecutive years. So I don't know. I'm a guy who loves bat speed and the ability to hit the ball hard. And he hits the ball really hard, and he has really nice bat speed. And I think, there's got to be... my personal theory of baseball is you have these athletic skills that you start with and you peak with those at the very beginning, and like a sprinter, you're peaking at 23, with stuff like sprint speed and bat speed and stuff, and then you have these learned skills that I think only go up over time until you're 30, 31, and at some point at 30, 31, the learned skills can't stave off the athletic skill decline. And that's where you just start declining in general. And I do have evidence for this. One of the things is you swing less and you chase less over time. That's the aging curve for swings and chases. So that speaks in Harris's favor. Is like, what if he had a full healthy season? I would expect his chase rate to be the best of his career, his swing rate to be the lowest over the course by the end of the season, and for him to have the season we've all been waiting for. There is an element of, will he do that? Because he hasn't done it. He hasn't crossed the 539 plate appearance threshold yet.
I'll say it again. I don't think Michael Harris is Dylan Carlson. I was just surprised that each year we've seen him has gone the wrong direction given the things that we like about him. Had to say it again. But here's the other thing.
I might like him the least out of this group because I really like the other 3.
But here's the other thing about Harris that I think needs to be in the conversation more often. Harris was moved to the big leagues faster than anybody probably planned on bringing him to the big leagues. Like 43 games at AA before he debuted, and then just a couple rehab stints in AAA since. And given his age, if he hadn't debuted until last year, that wouldn't be ridiculous. We'd still be very, very excited about him. So what he's been able to do already at this point in his career is extremely impressive. There is still more there. There are those adjustments that you're suggesting. I think they're still possible, especially with the quality of contact that he makes. It's just making those last changes on swing decisions. I think some of the hardest decisions to make, because you probably had an approach that served you really well your entire career. And now to get to that next level, to push yourself to be consistently in the top of the order, even when everybody's healthy, that's the kind of change you have to make. So that's probably the other little thing with Harris. I'm like, where's he hitting that lineup when everybody's healthy? Does he get a little buried sometimes? Does that work against him as well? Compared to these other guys, all 3 of which I think are critically important to the productivity of their respective lineups. Oneil Cruz, you like bat speed from Michael Harris. We talked about Oneil Cruz. As much bat speed as you could ask for, right? And we saw some growth from him last season. The swing and miss is still a concern. 30% K rate, but it was an improvement from what we saw back in 2022 when he came in with a 34.9% K rate, uses the bat speed to make hard contact. Like Harris, hits the ball on the ground, probably a little more than we'd like, but has power, has speed, and is clearly an everyday guy for the Pirates at this point. Like, there's no short-term platoon risk. It would be absurd for them not to continue playing Oneil Cruz as much as they possibly can.
Yeah. And I think I did say something about the Pirates not creating an above-average hitter, and I don't know why Oneil Cruz didn't show up. Maybe because of the plate appearance threshold. He has 1,000 plate appearances, but it's stretched over 3 years, and we're waiting for him to have the full season. The injuries that Cruz had, though, are a little bit different than Michael Harris's, I believe. The big one was just an awful situation at home plate where he can kind of his foot stuck, I don't know off the top of my head what the injuries were last year.
Yeah, fractured ankle was the bad one in 2023 that cost him most of that season, and it's just that's more in like the fluky bucket. Like, it's severe, but it's very, very random. It's not your quad, 4 weeks on the IL with the quad every year or something. It's just a devastating injury that you can't really stop. Last year, I'd have to look back to see what he missed time with. I mean, I played 146 games. If he missed time with an actual IL stint, it was brief.
Yeah.
But what do you do here when you're looking at this group? Because Wyatt Langford versus Cruz is more of, I think it's more of a like, do you want the extra ceiling, and who has the higher ceiling? Because I don't know if that's an easy question to answer. I think they both could be first rounders. Like, they both have future first round skills.
I think actually all 4 of these guys could play their way into the first round this year,
which is amazing because that means 4 players in the first round are going to fall out.
I don't think all 4 of them. No, I meant each of the 4.
It's possible that any one of them could have a season like that.
Yes. Not. I doubt that it would be pretty big odds to give. You have to give me some good odds for all 4 of them to get.
I thought that you were unhatching a bold prediction already on the 22nd of January.
Now, each of them has the skills, and each of them has at least Harris and Cruz have some health issues. Langford, I think we should look at that second half hard hit rate. I think Langford wasn't on this. Harris was. Harris had a 51.7% hard hit rate in the second half, which I think was just really stand out. And then James Wood, 51.5. So that's not only is that top 5 for the position, but when we've shown this hard hit rate leaderboard for other positions, the bottom has been around 36 for second base and 40 for third base. At the bottom of this list is Jazz Chisholm with a 48, Lars Nootbaar with a 48, and Julio Rodríguez with a 49. So, this outfield is a great place to get your hard hit. James Wood, I also left strikeout rate on there. Obviously, James Wood has a 27.9, but Mike Harris had a 18.2% strikeout rate in the second half, along with that 51.7% hard hit. So, there's a lot to like in Harris there, and Wood is a little bit more of your, big strikeout guy, like, I don't know, like a younger Adolis Garcia with a better plate approach though. So, or maybe like a Jorge Soler that can run. Like there's a lot to like about James Wood. Langford is, I think, a little bit more. It's not like all on the hard hit. He's a little bit more just good at everything and not necessarily elite at one thing. But that's a heck of a guy to build on in terms of, what kind of a floor does a guy who walks 10% of the time, strikes out 20% of the time, and barrels 10% of the time, and he also is going to steal 20 bags. Like I think his floor is that 260 20 that we've been talking about, and the ceiling comes from maybe adding a little element of power into the game, adding more barrels, adding more fly balls, whatever it is. And he really got into his own in the second half. And there's a great piece by Michael Rosen on Fangraphs about how Wyatt Langford in the second half was more upright. And in the first picture on the left, that's beginning of the season Langford, and he was really loading hard in his back hip. This is a kind of a college swing, as what Rosen put it. And what you can do if you load hard in your back hip in college is it's really great for lifting the ball with power, especially middle. But it doesn't give you the same kind of plate coverage that you might need in the big leagues when people are throwing, sweepers with 10 inches, 12 inches, 16 inches of break, and also trying to hit you up and in. So in the second half, Langford went to a much more upright batting stance that allowed him to cover more of the plate. And you just saw his strikeout rate go down, his batted ball stats go up, and he looked a lot more like what people thought. So I don't know if this is controversial, but I would say that the ceiling is higher for everybody else in this tier, but the floor is the highest for Langford.
Right. And I think you're saying that, again, not to say that Wyatt Langford lacks ceiling. It just says something about the skills that everybody else in this group also has. All right, you say you like all these guys, but if you only get one for 2025 at these prices in round 3, Who are you taking? Who's your choice?
I'm gonna take Langford. I'm still pretty risk averse in the first 3 rounds. I like Langford there. Although I'd be really tempted by Wood because he's got all the tools and he's gonna. I don't know how low his floor is. Like they're not gonna set him down. I don't think.
Yeah, we've hit that one a couple of times where it's like, what would he learn by going down? I don't think he'd learn really anything because he was so good at AAA. I think the interesting thing with Wood is he doesn't chase that much for a guy that struck out 28.9% of the time. So
he could become more aggressive. He could swing a little bit more often. And with that swinging strike rate at 10%, you'd expect a lower strikeout rate.
Yeah, you see projections already taking about 2%, 2.5% off of the rookie K rate from James Wood. He could maybe even do better than that. So I think that's pretty encouraging. A lot of ways for him to be good, as we've talked about before. Needs to lift the ball
115 in AAA last year, which is harder than Langford's ever hit it in terms of tracked balls.
Yeah, just needs to lift the ball a little more often. Even at AAA last year, 52.4% ground ball rate. That was actually the highest of any stop of his career until he got promoted to the big leagues, and then it was 55.6% with the Nats. But that's,
and we've seen this with other guys.
Concern.
I think we talked about this. Like people debut with the highest ground ball rates of their careers a lot. And if you can go back and look at their minor league system and you can kind of see where they're going to go with the ground ball rate, as opposed to, if a guy comes up and hits 55% ground balls, but he's been doing that all along in the minor leagues, then you might not forecast as much of a change.
Yeah, I think of this group though, I like them all. I think Wood for me is the ceiling play, even above Cruz, and I think Cruz has another level he could get to, especially if he keeps running, man. He was 22 for 23 as a base stealer last year. He's a burner. So if it doesn't come with more power from Oneil Cruz, it might come with more stolen bases. A lot of ways for this group to get better. Probably one of the most fun tiers of all the positions that we've talked about so far in the series. Let's move on to the next cluster, which basically runs from the pick 50 range all the way down.
You had those guys as like sort of a continuation of the tier.
They're kind of their own tier. They're like the real tier 2, whereas like the first 2 groups we talked about are all tier 1. It's just kind of like 1A and 1B because they're going inside the first 2 rounds. So
this is where I start to have questions. This one I may not have a lot of shares of. This is where I'm shopping in other bins. I'm looking for other things to do.
And it's even closer to pick 60 where you see Teoscar Hernandez goes. We'll say pick 60 to pick 100. It starts with Teoscar Hernandez, Lawrence Butler, Brenton Doyle, Seiya Suzuki, Luis Robert, and Bryan Reynolds round out the group. A fun group in the sense that they all do slightly different things. They've all got varying levels of experience and things that you like and things that you. But
I can just like really quickly go through this and give you a flaw for each of them. I feel like.
Okay, what's Teoscar Hernandez's flaw?
Age.
Okay. I mean, he's not old, but because of his age, you worry about strikeout rate slippage.
Yes, strikeout rate plus age. Lawrence Butler, track record. Brenton Doyle, strikeout rate and track record. Seiya Suzuki, health. Plus he's DHing full-time this year. Robert, health, plus strikeout rate. Reynolds is the highest floor of this group and the hardest sort of to pick the nits. But I would just say ceiling is a flaw. Is that can I use that?
Ceiling be a flaw? Can you be too consistently just very good that we don't think
he has no ceiling? He has no ceiling.
What I put on the sheet for today, it's an open question. Feel free to throw this into part of our Discord conversation. But here's what I wrote for Bryan Reynolds. I wrote this like a player outlook. The Toyota Camry of outfielders. Not much disagreement between systems when the inputs are this consistent.
Yeah.
If you were to surprise us in a category, would it be a spike in steals or homers? Because everything for Bryan Reynolds, and I say this like with a lot of respect, for being very good year over year is extremely difficult. And that's what Bryan Reynolds has been. Metronome player, 24 or more home runs, 4 years in a row, right? Run production limited in part by what he's got around him. Still, it's like every single year looks about the same. You're getting 70 plus runs. You're going to get 80 plus RBIs most years. Stolen bases, low double digits seems to be the norm now, right? For the last 2 seasons.
Little beginning of a slippage in bat speed, I think.
Yeah, maybe that's pretty normal. He's kind of at that part of his career now, so everything about him points to a graceful decline. I think the thing that works against Bryan Reynolds, and maybe the thing that keeps people walking when they look at a Toyota Camry, is like, well, you can You could find a more interesting player in this range, and you could find a more interesting car in that price point if you look for it. What do you want? Do you want dependability and reliability? This is not a Toyota commercial. I don't even own a Toyota. I think that there's something to that where it's like, well, I don't want. Maybe you took on a lot of risk early. Maybe you took a few swings early. Maybe you got some younger players in your core, or you took some injury risk already. Bryan Reynolds is really safe where he's going. He's a lot like Seiya Suzuki with a better health track record. I have no qualms with Suzuki going.
I guess one of my only problems is, and I'll repeat this because somebody asked about it again recently, is that my 15-team average player is 256 with 20 homers, 13 steals, and basically like 70 runs in RBI. And he's uncomfortably close to that.
He's about 10% better in everything except for steals.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I guess he's better than those numbers. I was going to make the case that if he is an average fantasy player, then he should be going with an average pick, which is later on than this.
I get it. It's not sexy. It's not exciting. Mm-hmm. I think you pointed a few things out with this group, though, that I want to push back on. I mean, Teoscar Hernandez's age, I can't actually deny what is on the player page, is getting older. We all are getting older. Something that it stuck with me from the forecaster with Teoscar Hernandez is the player he was last year from a pure skills perspective is the player that he was also in 2021 and 2022. The outlier year was the 1 year in Seattle, which he talked about. It's a miserable place to hit. Things didn't go well for him there. He bounced right back. And
even then, he was a 258, 26 homer, 7 stolen base guy. So, like, if that's your floor or whatever, then
oh my God, he was basically Bryan Reynolds in his worst year.
Yeah,
which is why you're paying more. Like, you're getting him at pick 60 and you're getting Reynolds at pick 100, but you're getting Teoscar in a place where he came back on a multi-year deal. He wants to be there, and the Dodgers wanted him back. The speed's actually a little sneaky, 83rd percentile sprint speed for Teoscar Hernandez. So I don't think the stolen bases are a lock to dry up there. He'll probably run at least as much as Reynolds does. Supporting cast is good. As long as you don't think the strikeout rate's going to just go to the moon quickly, and I don't think that's the case with Teoscar. I think he's okay here.
Guys running 16 and 17% swinging strike rates just make me really nervous.
Yeah, it's keeper dynasty concern, but I don't know if it's a 2025 concern for me. It's a steep price to pay.
And those, I play enough keeper and dynasty that these things bleed together and they creep in. Me.
Yeah, they creep in. But I think with Teoscar, though, part of it is looking at this group and saying, I don't know if I'm getting a lot more from most of this group than I'm getting from the group behind. Lawrence Butler put together his best full season at any level as a rookie in Oakland last year. He's always had power. He's always had speed. There were a lot of
I want to push back on my concerns. Butler one.
He was a top 15 hitter in the second half by the Fangraphs player rater. I mean, those were first-round skills at the end of the year, and you're getting them in round 5 of a draft right now. That's pretty nice.
And the second half included some, actual adjustments back and forth. I wanted to show... if you look at his rolling graphs over at Fangraphs, I've got his zone swing and his fastball percentage against his WOBA. And so what happened was that first WOBA spike is when he hit like 3 homers in one game in Philadelphia. And remember he just there was a point where everyone's like, oh my God, Lawrence Butler. You know what I mean? It's like he just sort of just blew up in the scene. And he had this crazy WOBA spike where his rolling WOBA was over 500 for a while. And then he had a return to earth. And when you see the return to earth lines up exactly with when pitchers stopped throwing him fastballs. And they started, and I asked him about this. I said, they've stopped throwing you fastballs. They're filling up the zone with junk. And guess what Butler did? He started swinging more in the zone. So he reacted. And I think this is just huge. I mean, this to me, the 2 WOBA peak, because he got back to 500 WOBA again later in the season. And this is when pitchers had a different strategy against him. They weren't throwing him the fastball. They were throwing him junk in the zone, and he exploded again. So to me, he's done it twice with 2 different approaches. I think that's huge.
I think it's exactly what you want to see a young player do. Play that game. Play the adjustments in a way where you are still dangerous even with the second or third way teams are pitching you. I think that's exactly what Lawrence Butler did, and that was a great way of pointing it out. I think if I had to take one player at price from this group, Butler's probably that guy. It doesn't mean I'll have a lot of Lawrence Butler. I think he's going to be in a lot of riser sections. He's not going to be in sleeper columns because he's going in the top 100. At least
is he going to steal more bases than anybody else in this list? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Everyone except for Doyle, man. So the thing I was going to push back on with Brenton Doyle, you said he's strikeout rate. He got down to 25.4% last year. Like that's a massive improvement. I didn't see that coming at all. He went from a 35% when he debuted to 25.4%. Walked a little bit more, chased a bit less, made hard contact more often.
6.
Yeah, and just as I kind of brought the Michael Harris barely played above AA before getting into the big leagues argument, where did Brenton Doyle play college ball, you know?
I don't know. Where did he play?
Brenton Doyle played college ball at Shepherd University in West Virginia. And I believe Shepherd's D2.
Is that Division I?
I'm
D2.
Pretty sure Shepherd's D2. So,
and I've actually heard, this was a little bit that I heard just randomly from, I was talking to a D2 coach that in some ways, sometimes D3 play can be better because D2 schools are really strange. They're like trying to be D1. They're trying to move from one to the other. And so what you'll see is that D2 schools disappear, like their programs disappear. Either they become D1 or they disappear at times. So, I don't even know. There's an over-under on whether or not Shepherd still has a baseball program.
Sad, but probably it's true. Is something to be mindful of. I bring it up though because it's like, okay, we talk about the quality of pitching labs and tech and information data training.
He wasn't dealing.
He wasn't. He didn't have that like that, and
he still doesn't have that, to be honest.
and like the other thing I want to point in here is like even in places like that, there can be great coaches. There can be sharp people that are helping you get better. Even in Colorado, totally. Like I don't think Colorado is an organization devoid of intelligent people. I think they're under-resourced as an organization. Like that's the main flaw, the biggest flaw, in my opinion, of the Rockies. So the thing I like about Brenton Doyle is that he is an elite defender at a position that is valued, right? 100%. Yeah. Like 2 Gold Gloves in 2 years in center field. Got the Fielding Bible title for best center fielder, their award. Was pretty good against same-handed pitching. 18 of his 23 homers last year came against righties. Had the big home road splits that you'd expect. It was a 28.8%.
It's actually good to have a righty at a premium position because you don't feel like they'll get platooned.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's max volume playing time here, so long as the way he plays center field is an occupational hazard.
I just get nervous. Like if you took him and put him in a different park, I would be a lot less interested in him.
But that's not happening. He's not going anywhere. He's a Rocky man. He's not leaving. So even if you want to split the difference in K rate and say it's a 28% K rate and the batting average is probably going to be just sort of okay, the projections are all going to spit out 20 homers and high 20 steals. And I can't really push back on that. He's efficient as a base stealer. He's going to play every day, and he's showing signs of getting a little bit better.
Let me give you this, though. Do you want to play this player? 222, 273, 356.
Yeah.
629 OPS.
I don't want to play that player every week on the road. And at this price, to sit him is costly. So
that's another part of it. It's like I've done this with Ryan McMahon where I was like happy to get him. And then I realized that and his splits aren't even as bad. But there were times where I was like, dang, I bought this guy to be my starting CI or whatever, and there are weeks where I'm like trying to find somebody else.
Yeah, but I just don't want to run right by Brenton Doyle and pretend like something hasn't. He's changed. He's showing some signs of growth at the plate that make him a little more interesting. I don't know if there's
but
one
Butler
more
has
level.
A shot at 30-30. I don't think anybody else in this tier does, and I think Hernández and Reynolds, are actually, the oatmeal of the group.
Yeah,
and Doyle has his own risk. Suzuki has a lot going for him. I was a little bit flip on him just saying, age 30, difficulty staying healthy. He's topped out at 585 plate appearances. But he's been 29% better than league average when he's been in there, Seiya Suzuki has. And there's something in the max EV and the barrel rates that suggests that if he pulled the ball a little bit more, he could have a little bit of a power outbreak. And nobody's projecting him for that. They're all projecting him to go 260, 20, 12, which is, a lot like Bryan Reynolds with a few more stolen bases. But Bryan Reynolds does not hit the ball 115.5. So there's something in Seiya's profile that suggests that there might be a bigger power ceiling than people are giving him.
I definitely like Seiya Suzuki more than Bryan Reynolds. It's reflected in ADP. It's there. I probably wouldn't take Brenton Doyle ahead of him. I would take Lawrence Butler ahead of Suzuki. I think that's right. I think you can kind of like shift these players around by their multi-categorical contributions. And then you kind of end up with this Brenton Doyle versus Luis Robert toss-up that we may have even put on the show back in the fall. I feel like that came up as, hey, these guys are going next to each other. That's kind of weird. If you like risk and reward, take your shot. The projections for playing time for Luis Robert are all above career levels, so you have to tell yourself that story. Easier to do that at this point in the draft than it is at the very top with someone like Tatis. All the systems agree that he's at least a better than league average bat. So are we looking at a top 25 or 30 hitter coming at a slight discount because he's in a pretty bad rebuilding White Sox lineup? Because it also comes with some injury risk. Second time he's had a lengthy absence with a hip injury last year. So that's kind of lingering in there too as part of the risk profile with Luis Robert.
Yeah. Oopsie has them $8 apart and has Robert Jr. as the 13th best outfielder in baseball. It also has Robert with a 665 plate appearance number that he's never even crossed 600. So I'm going to take the under on all that.
We saw the worst K rate of his career last year. So there's that kind of built in. The batting average risk you have with Doyle, the swing and miss risk you have with Doyle, it's right there. This is one of the best toss-ups. Which of these things is more likely to pan out?
There's also, I think there's a little whiff of the industry making a comment on this, which is that, a guy who is under potential team control for 3 more years, or this year and 2 more, at a cheap deal, at like $10 million per, and who can still ostensibly play center field with teams that have some unsettled center field action and are contenders. We got the Astros with Jake Myers at 24th, the Rays with Johnny Luke at 25th, the Royals at 26th, the Blue Jays, even with Dalton Varsho, 27th, the Mets with Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, 28th on the depth chart. These teams have not traded for Luis Robert.
It's still late January. It's still possible.
It is still possible. Robert would be a pretty big pickup for the Mets, I think. But it also suggests that maybe the White Sox are looking at these like oopsie type projections and saying, you better give us something for a top 15 outfielder who can play center field. And the other teams are saying, dude, your guy can't stay on the field and he strikes out a bunch. And this is a league that's trying to, add more contact,
That's the tricky part. Is I think the White Sox best path to get something closer, like the return you'd get if you believe on the high end projections, is having him play really well for 3 or 4 months to begin the season,
and strike out less.
Strike out less. Don't get hurt, and Frankenstein the best parts of your profile together. The return changes considerably if that happens. That's the gamble I think they have to take. I think they're right to wait it out. They're not getting what they want right now because of the runway.
He's also a really interesting thing that, we say chase rate a lot. We talk about chase rate a lot, but each player has their own optimal chase rate, really. And the reason I bring this up is that he was really aggressive 21, 2022, and 23, where he was swinging at almost 50% of the balls he saw outside the zone. And his strikeout rate was lower combined in those 3 years. He had a similar swinging strike rate in 2024, and he chased less and he struck out more. And that's because he has a poor sense of the zone. And asking him to swing less will lead to more, taken strike threes. So, I think chase rate is one of those things that's like very hard to actually change. It does describe a lot of your aging patterns, and it's not a one number thing where you can say chase rate bad, player bad. It's one of those more nuanced things. But I have heard from coaches that it's very hard to change with coaching. So, and you can see sort of in this case, I might tell Robert, hey, just swing away, man. Just go for it.
Yeah, I think I'm Robert over Doyle if I'm choosing from that group. We've got one more group we're going to try to get to here before we wrap up this episode. It's the beginning of the fourth tier, pick 100 to pick 120. We've talked about Cody Bellinger before. He's kind of sandwiched in here. Eno's not really into him. I think he's fine at the price. But this group includes Anthony Santander, Riley Green, Christian Yelich, and Spencer Steer, who was also covered on a previous preview. So not as many names to talk about in this group. Let's start with Santander. We didn't talk about this with the move, but the park factors, moving from Orioles Park to Rogers Center, is it a slight bump? I think when we had this card up a little earlier, looking at homers minus X homers, Anthony Santander had 36.6 expected homers, 44 actual homers last year. So if you were looking at what he did last season and saying that's probably coming down, well, X homers agrees. But the other thing that caught my eye on this graphic is that it also includes no doubter percentage of home runs that would have been homers in all 30 parks. Anthony Santander, 45.5% of his home runs were no doubters. The only player who also was on this card that has that is Aaron Judge at 49.2%. So it's legit power. There's no question about that at all. Anthony Santander. It's very obvious, but I thought it was just kind of a funny thing that he was very, air quotes, lucky in terms of homers last year.
And there's just like give and take every year. So if you look at expected home runs by park, which takes wall heights, distances, and environmental effects into account. So, temperature and things like that. He has 151 expected home runs in Baltimore and 151 career expected home runs in Toronto. So most of my worries about Santander are longer term and a little bit more about his real life package, which I think he'll be a DH after not long, and that can affect his play on the field. But he does have an enticing mix of contact and bat speed that should produce at least 240 and 30, 35 homers next year. It's just, that's below average when it comes to average, and so it's a build play. It's like it works in some builds and it doesn't work for others.
I would say if you were bummed to have missed out on Teoscar Hernandez a few rounds earlier, Santander is at least kind of similar, albeit probably with 10 to 15 points less in a batting average projection and in the final output. Lineup quality, Dodgers versus Blue Jays, also going to impact the counting stats a bit. But as far as the thump you need, this is power spackle, maybe a little expensive, but it's good power spackle nonetheless if you're looking
maybe
to
you took
catch up
Carroll early when other people were taking guys who are going to hit 30 homers.
Yeah. I think the Riley Green question is a fun one. It's the second year we saw the barrel rate nudge up as he's lifting the ball more. He's only 12 for 18 as a base stealer now in his career. It's 329 big league games. It's like a half dozen per year.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to really be a stolen base threat.
So what I think the question is with Riley Green, redraft, long term, it applies to both. If he's going to be a 4 category stud, it has to come from batting average. And if that's going to happen, I think the strikeout rate has to come down. Now, he's young enough where it could easily be part of the profile, could keep improving in that regard. Are you banking on 24. That? The XBA had him at 253 last year. Do you think there's 270, 280 batting averages coming from Riley Green as a guy that could be taking one more step forward here as he continues to gain experience? I think
if he takes a step forward, it's actually in power. And my reasoning is that a 114 max TV is pretty good. The bat speed is good, and you can see with Oopsie, with similar playing time, Oopsie's giving him 25 homers and Steamer's giving him 22, 23. So, I think the upside here is for a 260-30 guy. That's where I'd be hoping for 260-35. His swing strike rate 11%. He's projected to improve. His aging curve suggests he should improve his strikeout rate, but I don't think it'll be by so much that he becomes like a 21, 22% K rate guy, which I think you have to be to kind of get to 280 territories. So could he be a little bit lucky on balls in play, hit the ball hard, have a good BABIP? So far, he's had a pretty good BABIP. Could he get to like 270? Yeah, but I think I'd be more interested in him hitting 260, 265 with 30 homers.
I think at least a reason to not draft Bryan Reynolds, because I think you can get the Bryan Reynolds numbers as sort of like a safe, this is what he does already
thing.
But
yeah. And then
like, whereas Reynolds, we're like, I'm not really sure there's any more ceiling there. We would have probably seen more evidence of it by now.
Here,
You still get some ceiling with Riley Green, and you're not really giving up a lot of floor. I think that's probably the best way I could describe him right now. But yeah, I just thought it was a little strange that coming up, maybe we looked at him as someone that was going to hit 280, 290, maybe even 300 someday in the big leagues. And I think that has started to fade a little bit. Last but not least of this group, as I mentioned, we talked about Bellinger and Steer already in a previous episode. Christian Yelich, we haven't heard a lot really since the winter meetings. At that point, Yelich was on track in his recovery from back surgery. That was during the winter meetings in December. At that time, he had not started baseball activities. The surgery, you might recall, microdiscectomy, performed to try and eliminate the back stuff that was bothering him for a few years. So everything was trending in the right direction in December. That's nice. What are you doing with Yelich here? Because I think you can... It's kind of like another version of the Acuña problem, where if you look at projections and the projections assume that he's just going to be okay coming off of back surgery, then the optimism in the projection says must draft at price. But when you start to think about the mechanics of that injury and just coming off of surgery and how they might be a little more careful with him, do you start to temper your enthusiasm a bit?
Yeah, like, do you think he'll, like, everyone's like, oh yeah, he'll steal 20 bags and hit 18 homers. Like, there's like the projections are all the same for him. I'm just not sure that he's going to steal 20 bags. So I think my personal projection for him is like, 575 plate appearances, 17 homers and 12 bags.
All right, you're just cutting stolen bases in half, basically. You're not even dinging him that much on playing time compared to some of the numbers that are out there. So that's not bad.
But the numbers that are out there are dinging him on playing. Like 575 plate appearances is not a full suite.
Right, yeah, they've already built in some buffer. And like preventative maintenance or buffer if he's not ready to start the season, which is not even the indication right now.
I'll grab him if he's falling. I'll grab him if he falls. I may have a green share. I don't think I'm going to be buying Santander. Bellinger and Steer are Spider-Man mean for me. They had exactly the same launch angle, like the exact same max EV, like the exact same barrel rate. Like, they both stole 20 bags and they both are going to have nice parks. Like, so for me, I think I might put Bellinger, Yelich, and Steer in a little mini tier if I had a need there. And once one goes, maybe I take one of the other two.
My only argument that I have for Yelich, and this is not a homer argument as much as it's just saying his back was bothering him these last few seasons. Last year he was 21 for 22 as a base dealer with a bad back. Right. Yeah. If it fixes the problem, I think it's an important part of how he provides value to this club. So I don't think it whereas with Acuña, it's kind of like, hey, 2 torn ACLs. Let's just be a little careful initially. With Yelich, maybe they'll do the same kind of thing. But
maybe he's just like, you feel good or you don't.
Right. And even when he wasn't feeling great, he was still running as much as he did.
Still stole bags. Yeah, that's an interesting argument. And it might be an argument for near full playing time because that team, doesn't have great hitters up and down the lineup.
Dude, you can't just do that when I have to end the show. You can't do that. Because then, like, the people that follow the Brewers, that love the Brewers, are like, DVR didn't even defend the Brewers. Like, slandered them. Brick gets them all the time. Katie Woo drops in and slanders the Brewers. They can't hit. They're not. I heard it. I will defend it later because we literally have to go. So just know, Brewers fans, I am acknowledging that dig. And I will get even for it at some point, at a date to be named later. Maybe it'll happen in the Discord when I have a moment of clarity, but it will happen at some point. You can join our Discord with the link in the show description. Get those hive mind rankings in for the previous positions or for the outfield. Again, the outfield's bigger. It's going to go 50 deep. So if you want to wait till parts 2 and 3 of our position previews in the outfield come out, feel free to do that on Blue Sky. You can find enosaris.bsky.social. You can find me, dvr.bsky.social. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.